Right, so over my last few Murder Drones videos, I have time and time again mentioned a selection of fan-made comics that have come into production near or after the completion of the series proper, and how with there being no more Murder Drones from Glitch, these comics have become the primary source of any Murder Drone addict's fix. But how good are these comics really? How well do they stack up to the show, and more importantly, how well do they stack up to each other? Well, that's what I'm here to find out. Today we're going to be taking 3 of the most popular Murder Drones comics and comparing them across a wide variety of topics to see if we can find the best option for you to get obsessed with. The topics I'm going to look at are designed to be for the most part neutral to all 3 comics, and as the title implies, I will be as unbiased as possible when looking at them. Premise. What is the main idea behind the comic? How interesting is this idea, and how well is it explored? All 3 comics we're looking at today are AUs, or alternate universes, and as such differ from the main Murder Drones premise significantly. Characters. How are our core cast of characters handled within the story? Are they similar to the canon versions, or have they been altered? If they are altered, was it for the better or for the worse? Have they added in any new characters, and what is their role in the story? Art and formatting. This is a broader topic that covers the art style of the comic, its consistency and its appeal, as well as the layout of the comic, its flow and its readability. And finally, reach. What platforms are the comic available on? Can you find it easily and stay up to date? And there we have it. I'm sure there are a few other sections that could be covered here, but this list is a pretty good sweeper for everything that we should be looking for in a good comic. I've also gotten permission from the fantastic Rosie and Toasty to use voice acted clips performed by them and their respective co-stars. I'll leave all their links in the description to check them out after this video, but first, let's get into our topics. Premise goes first because it also allows me to explain what each of these comics are about while still making my points at the same time. I will also note that none of these comics are finished yet, so some of my criticisms may become invalid. First up by Vinyls, we have Mafia Drones. Set on Copper 9, though without any real mention of a human presence ever being there, the drone society is organised into several mafia syndicates, with alliances formed between different families of drones. The Doormans still cater to Khan's passion of providing doors, but also make other types of defensive machinery. Meanwhile, the Murder Drones are no longer new arrivals sent by the company, but are instead members of the Skull Drones family, a sort of upper class that has many families of workers underneath them. The story follows the fallout from Uzi's railgun breaking during a test run and blowing up part of the Murder Drones family manor, killing several drones in the process. Uzi and N find themselves stuck together in a tense relationship as the Doormans are brought in under the Skull Drones, with some members of the latter group looking for Uzi's head and others like N and Sin looking to protect her. Aside from being set on Copper 9, Mafia Drones holds very little resemblance to the original show, and could very easily be reskinned to be a story about any other world. Of course, this does mean that we are never likely to fall into repetition or complete copying of the show, but this much change may drive some viewers away from this comic. Vinyls has essentially changed the genre of what we're seeing from a thriller horror title to a political drama and intrigue. This isn't necessarily a bad change, but if I were to describe what it is without telling you it was Murder Drones, then you probably wouldn't be able to tell, which I think is pushing it just a little too far. Therefore, I'm going to give Mafia Drones premise a 7 out of 10. If Mafia Drones was very removed from the canon show, then Drones of the Deep by Bunix Furs is the exact opposite. As of the time of writing, it is essentially a mirror of the first half of the pilot.
But our parent company didn't like the thought of the planet full of rogue AI.
Just with an underwater theme instead of an above ground one. The doors are replaced with vines, the laser cannon with a harpoon gun, and N gets his ass kicked once more. The only significant difference is Uzi's motivation. Rather than being motivated by a desire to prove herself to her dad, she instead looks to avenge her mum's death at the hand of the drones in a fashion similar to Doll's original motive for attacking V. I do think this is a better motivation for Uzi, but I will touch on that a little bit more in the character segment. My criticisms for the rest of the premise are essentially the polar opposite to that of Mafia Drones. By staying so close to the original story, you don't really give yourself a lot of room to explore, and you risk fans becoming bored because this is a story they've already heard before. That being said, it is a story that everyone who will read this comic is known to like, so there is far less risk attached to this option. But when it comes down to rating, I just can't give it that many points because it is Liam's story, so 6 out of 10. And finally, we have the Panic AU. This premise is a little bit of a doozy, so I will put a warning here for those of us with a fragile mental state. Taking place post episode 8, N, who is referred to as Nico in this comic, goes a little bit insane / freaky / Murder Drones instincts and straight up eats Uzi in the first panel of the comic. He gets some heavy post cannibalism clarity, realizes that he has majorly fucked it, and freaks the hell out. Hence the panic in the title. Going to V first, he makes up a story about Uzi going missing and sets off as far away from the Murder Drones colony, and Khan, as is possible, constantly staying on the move to avoid Thad, who is not aware that this is the case. Nico is also slowly losing his mind thanks to the mysterious and psychotic alternate version of himself called Nyx, that lives in mirrors and dreams all school bus graveyard-like. The Panic AU takes a very different approach to storytelling when compared to Mafia Drones and Drones of the Deep. While the other two comics are self-contained stories to which the viewers are only passive observers, Candy Asbestos has instead implemented a question box system to advance the story. For those of you unaware, a question box style story is one where the readers submit questions for the cast, which are then used as the foundation for the author to reveal more about the plot. These questions are often cherry-picked, but nevertheless have a much more direct connection to the story, as it feels like we the readers have control over where it goes next. The downside of this system though is the entire thing is fourth wall breaks, which makes the part of the story that is self-contained not hit as hard as they would do if that wall stayed sealed. 8 out of 10. Now that we have our own central stories established, let's take a look at the treatment of the cast we know and love and get to know some of the creators' OCs as well. Mafia Drones has by far the biggest cast out of the 3 comics we're looking at today. It includes our main 3 different J's, Nori, Sin, Lizzie and her mum, some other miscellaneous murder drones, a couple of OCs, and mentions, though hasn't shown as of yet, Khan and Tessa. This is a massive cast, which does play quite well into the drama style the comic is trying to achieve, but also means it suffers from the same problem that Digital Circus is currently dealing with. It's impossible to allow such a large group appropriate time to develop and have their personalities and intricacies shown to the audience. This was the only comic I read while not sleep deprived, and the cast still started to blend together a little bit. That being said, our key pair, N and Uzi, as well as a few supporting members including V and Sin, have been developed quite well in their time in the spotlight, so we'll go over them and take a look at how they differ. Uzi maintains the same general personality that she has in the show. She's angsty, rebellious, and a bit of a lone wolf with a desire to prove herself to her dad. She's smart and tech savvy, but overestimates her abilities at times, which can lead to things going wrong.
Let's see. I have less than 2 weeks. If the skull drones allow me, I can... Ugh! This has to be a dream and a nightmare. Am I gonna have the capacity to do this?
Where she differs from the canon version is this Uzi still has a lot of respect for authority. While she's willing to skirt around the rules in ways that will only get her in minor trouble, she refuses to break more serious rules by rejecting N's advances. She's also more family first, which lines up with the Mafia theme. Her motivation for building the railgun here being to use it to get the Dormans into a better position among the Skull Drones. N, in contrast, couldn't be more different from his canon version. The Mafia Drones N is a strong, stoic leader who has both rank and reputation on the other murder drones in the series. He's very sure of himself and almost always gets what he wants, the exception to that currently being Uzi. This design is set to mimic a mob boss type character to stay in line with the Mafia theme. Apart from Sin, who is simply an innocent child in this, there is no quippy or goofy comic relief character in Mafia Drones. It takes itself much more seriously, which is something the episodes 4 and 5 lacked, affecting the way that the audience reviewed those episodes. Overall, I will say that there are perhaps too many characters in this comic for it to work flawlessly, but the characters that are focused on get developed very well. 7 out of 10. For Drones of the Deep, I have very little to say. The characters present in it are essentially the same characters as we see in the show itself. One of our only minor changes is Uzi's differing motivation, which I believe was a positive change. Wanting to take revenge for her mother is a much more reasonable motive for risking her life than what we got in the show proper. However, this only works because of the other character change we see, which is the introduction of Nori as a full drone in the opening. She's shown to be kind and caring as a traditional mother figure that Uzi has become quite closely attached to. There haven't really been any characters in Murder Drones that are genuinely good people and competent enough to make the choice to stay that way, so while the changes are minimal, they do all seem to be for the better. Unfortunately, the lacking in creativity in copying Liam's work will chop a point off, to 9 out of 10. The Panic AU is the only one of the 3 comics to not introduce a single new character that would be out of place in the canon due to it taking place after episode 8 and thus having access to a rebuilt Nori. It's hard to talk about Uzi as a character in this one because she just dies instantly and then comes back as a ghost but doesn't do a whole lot of talking. Ghost Uzi isn't meant to be a replica of the real thing, but nonetheless is entirely passive and mostly serves as an observer of N's descent into madness. Speaking of N, the now solo main character in this story is once again completely rewritten. Obviously, there's now an insane lack of impulse control here, but Nico also completely lacks the happiness and goofy nature that normal N has. Overall, he's just a complete mess, mentally and physically, with the presence of Nyx, the personification of his worst aspects, not helping in the slightest. V also has changed significantly in the comic, going from a hardened warrior to more soft and sympathetic type. Her care towards N that was hinted at but never really explored in the show is now made the central focus of her character, and this is marked by the glasses that she now chooses to wear more permanently. And finally, a strange character to point out as central to the story is Thad. We don't exactly get a lot on his character in the show proper to establish him, but the Panic AU appears to follow the rough scaffolding that he was given. He's an optimistic jock who cares about Uzi and N, and that's about all we get. I think my only problem with the character characters here is just N. Yes, him killing Uzi is the whole foundation of this story, but it just doesn't seem like something you'd see him doing. Some people may be willing to accept it, but for the large majority who can't, it's going to put them off the comic completely. However, the rest of the cast is passable, so 6 out of 10. The Mafia Drones art style is arguably its biggest draw in terms of what separates it from other fan projects out there. Every single frame of the art is detailed and rendered very well, and the character outfits and designs are classy and sophisticated. It's very easy to tell that a lot of the time used to make this comic is poured into refining that art style and giving it that professional feel that many other fan projects lack, allowing more people to gain an initial interest in the product. Unfortunately, Mafia Drones suffers from an issue that plagues both it and Drones of the Deep, and that has to do with its layout. Both comics are structured with wide multi-panel pages similar to that of a traditional comic book, which means extra attention must be put into the order in which everything is viewed. Doing this properly requires an understanding of the natural tendencies of the human eye when looking at images, as well as the ability to manipulate your art to draw the eye to specific points. Both comics do a decent job of getting the images in the right order, but the text boxes become a problem, which is why they've both implemented a numbering system to signal to the reader which order to read the dialogue in. This is an inherently worse way to go about formatting a comic, as you've now forced the reader to lose focus on what's happening within, to instead go on a scavenger hunt for little number balloons. Mafia Drones is especially guilty of this, often having text bubbles meant to be read in succession on opposite sides of the page, or leaking bubbles from one frame to another, and making it unclear which image it relates to. Art gets a 9 out of 10, formatting is a 5 out of 10, so we'll give them the middle ground 7. Drones of the Deep suffers less from this issue thanks to placing a thicker border in between each of its main scenes in order to segregate the comic a little bit more and make it more digestible. The art isn't quite on the level of Mafia Drones, with some mild distortion and less detailed rendering. Where it really shines though is through its use of light. Pun intended. The ocean depths are inherently very dark, and that's seen in the backgrounds of this comic. This makes the use of vibrant lighting for the screens, weapons, and even on some level the text very effective for bringing the important aspects of the scene to the forefront. 7 out of 10. The Panic AU art style is a very divisive one. Each panel is coated with bright neon pinks, yellows, and greens. The characters are often made to be single colours instead of the more realistic depictions seen in the other comics. It's also much more open with its use of gore, coming in a similar space as Indonesian Cube during some of the panels. I've had discussions with individuals who've said that this was very off-putting to them and made them abandon the comic. Others have said that the eye-catching style is one of the main reasons they like it in the first place. When it comes to formatting, the Panic AU doesn't use full pages, instead it follows more of a comic strip style. Think Calvin and Hobbes for anyone over the age of 30, and a decent Google search for the rest of you. This does have the advantage of allowing Candy Asbestos to simply put the dialogue in without having to number it, but it does limit other opportunities for interesting bleeds and continuations between panels. All 3 comics have unique strengths and weaknesses here, so I can't say that any one is better than the other, so I'm giving this a 7 as well. When it comes to ease of access for a comic, you can't really do much better than what Mafia Drones has. The full comic is on Webtoon, Wattpad, Instagram, and Twitter, with multiple comic dubs on YouTube as well. There are no barriers to entry, and the whole thing is completely free, making it incredibly easy for anyone who's interested to get a hold of the comic. 10 out of 10. Drones of the Deep also does relatively well in this regard, being available for free on both Webtoon and Twitter, but there are fewer platforms than Mafia Drones, and it has less presence on YouTube due to it currently being much shorter, but still very solid. 8 out of 10. Here's where the Panic AU clearly falls short of the other 2 series. It's only available on Twitter and the card website dedicated to the comic. And that's all of the categories I have for this video. Now let's take a look at the final results. Mafia Drones collected a score of 31 out of 40.
I will make sure my family and legacy rise. My first step is to get their acceptance.
Consistently losing a few points across the first 3 categories, but with a perfect score in the final one helping a lot. Drones of the Deep managed 30 points.
Stupid humans. Language, Uzi. Neat.
Losing out heavily in the premise, but still managing very high scores in the character and reach categories. And finally, the Panic AU slips behind the others with a net score of 26.
I'm sorry.
Having 2 categories where it polled very poorly in comparison to the others, with the categories in which it performed well not being enough to lift it up. So from the data we found, we can comfortably say that the Panic AU has the lowest amount of things needed to produce a well-made and successful comic, with Mafia Drones and Drones of the Deep being roughly the same. Now that's not to say that the Panic AU is a bad product, or if you like it more than the others, you are wrong. How much a person enjoys one of these comics is subject to their own personal taste. It is just that Mafia Drones and Drones of the Deep are more likely to appeal to a randomly selected Murder Drones fan than the Panic AU is. So So let's provide just a little bit more guidance to narrow down what you should learn more about and read if you haven't already. If you want a story that's very similar to the original that you love but with a fresh coat of paint, then check out Drones of the Deep. If you're a big fan of Newsy or want to see a story focused more on character interactions, then Mafia Drones is what you're looking for. And if you want a comic that isn't afraid to be violent and where you can get a unique experience of feeling like you're a participant in the story, then I'd recommend the Panic AU. But that's all I've got for today. Thank you all for watching, and have a good one.